Welcome everybody to our bonus May Canada Wildfire webinar. We're really excited today to do a little bit of a different presentation. So we're going to be learning about occupational smoke exposure mitigation for Canadian wildland firefighters, a human-centered design to translational research approaches. I'm looking forward to learning more about how this study's innovative translational research methods are working to move evidence into impact in wildland firefighter health. Today, we have three graduate students from the University of Toronto joining us, Arani, Janna, and Sumegha. After their presentation, we will have time for questions and are hopeful that time will evolve into an interactive discussion. In the interest of having an interactive discussion, we will be ending the recording after the presentation so people feel comfortable to unmute, turn on their cameras if you want, and just share their ideas. If questions or ideas come to you during the presentation, please post them in the chat box and we will be sure to circle back to them once the presenters are done. So welcome Arani, Janna, and Sumegha. We're really excited to have you here today and I'm going to hand the reins over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I want to firstly start off by thanking the team at Canada Wildfire for having us today. As mentioned, we are Team Protecting Our Protectors. We're a group of master's students from the University of Toronto in the Translational Research program. And we're really excited today to get to share our work with you all around investigating strategies to mitigate occupational exposure to smoke pollution for Canadian wildland firefighters. So as a precursor, we are coming into this wildfire space as learners and as students, and we're using this opportunity today as a way to hear from different perspectives, share our research, and also learn from you on how to kind of better inform our project as well. So before we get started, I wanted to quickly gauge how everyone is feeling today. This is a quick little fun exercise. Feel free to characterize yourself in the chat. I would say for myself, I'm feeling a little mix between like C and D. So that's how I'm feeling today. Awesome.
We have some A's in the chat.
Yeah, we have a lot of A's.
Yeah, I love C too. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll get into an overview of what we'll be covering for today. So we'll go in very briefly a little bit about us as a team, the challenge that we're tackling, looking at the people at the center of the work and center of the problem, a little bit on health impacts, what's currently being done in the wildfire space, and then also looking at our project. So to start off with about us, so as mentioned, we are Team Protecting Our Protectors. We are second-year master's students in the Translational Research program at the University of Toronto, composed of myself, Sumegha, and Janna. We all are coming from science and healthcare backgrounds, and for this capstone project, we've united through a common passion around environmental and occupational health. So a little bit more about us in terms of our research and our work. We use the Toronto Translational Framework as the guide for majority of our research that we'll be speaking to you about today. This framework is based on a human-centered design that essentially takes a problem from a current state to a desired state through a person-centered approach to really understand the true needs of a population and how, as researchers, we can build an intervention that is impactful and meets their needs. So throughout this presentation, we'll walk you through the different phases of the framework and how we applied these concepts into our real world work. So for now, I'll speak about the initial phases, which you can see highlighted in red, of understanding the current state within identifying the problem and recognizing the unmet needs. So we'll get into a little bit of the challenge. So the big question we asked ourselves when we started our capstone project was, what is the problem space we are looking to tackle? So that led us centering our question around the people and asking ourselves which groups are the most vulnerable to air pollution exposure in Canada. And then also asking following that, what gaps or areas of improvement are these people facing? So that takes us to the people at the center of the problem. So through several conversations with subject matter experts in our initial kind of discovery phase, we identified a target population that we felt was deeply impacted by air pollution, that was going majorly unnoticed by the general public. So our project, as many of you can predict by now, centers around the lived experiences of wildland firefighters. So we're aiming with our project to collaboratively tackle the challenge of occupational smoke exposure without effective mitigation measures. So going back to the Toronto Translational Framework, the framework really emphasizes a person-centered approach. So we can break this down into what that approach looks like for our project. So essentially, people-centered means you put the people at the center of the problem, at the center of the work, and you involve them from the very beginning. So initially, we started with speaking directly with wildland firefighters across Canada and really understanding the value of lived experience to learn from them what are the real gaps and challenges that they are facing. And I felt like the power of hearing them speak about their personal challenges really resonated with our team and helped us understand kind of the gravity of the challenges that they were facing. So I would say our team spent around 5 months in outreach, speaking to a diverse array of experts in different problem spaces until we found that demographic with a clear need. Next, we wanted to really identify what need we were tackling. So through extensive conversations, again, we allowed wildland firefighters to guide us into a problem space that they felt was important and impactful for them. So these were the gaps that they expressed being the most pressing to protect their health. And then lastly, verifying and validating a need as within the framework is really important because you also want to make sure you have a real problem with a real need to be addressed. And this really came from speaking directly with the people when we started noticing reoccurring patterns in the challenges that were being raised by both the wildland firefighters and also the subject matter experts as well. So you might be wondering how, as outsiders to this space with no relevant expertise, how we did our best to kind of inform ourselves of the world of wildland firefighting. So this really stemmed from a place of curiosity, and we consulted with various different avenues of people, organizations, resources to better our knowledge and understanding of what wildland firefighting context looks like in Canada, and the gaps and challenges that they were currently facing to better inform the next steps for our project. So here I really want to highlight the significance, again, of lived experiences. We spoke to several wildland firefighters and wildfire personnel working in different organizations, agencies, who shared with us their boots on the ground perspectives, which gave us more of an immense insight into the context of wildland firefighting, and also to check our own biases and perceptions of what we thought we knew versus the current reality. So here's a brief overview of the main takeaways for us as we spoke to wildland firefighters about their lived experiences and what they shared about smoke pollution awareness and respiratory protection. So you can see here, there are some quotes we pulled from some of our outreach. I'll read them out, I'll read a few of them out that stuck out to us. So we were told organic smoke, which is wood burning, is not bad for us. We don't wear any respiratory protection. I feel safer on the field not wearing current respirators as it impairs communication. We are taught the technical needs of the job, nothing on health impacts from smoke pollution. And then lastly, current masks and designs are not made for our context. They're not breathable, comfortable, and easily get sweaty. So from here, we quickly learned that there are gaps in the uptake of respiratory protection since there isn't anything tailored to their specific working and environmental context, and little to none awareness and or knowledge on the health impacts of smoke pollution. Something else we also learned about was the occupational differences between a wildland firefighter and also a structural or city firefighter. So you can see some of the differences listed there on the screen. Wildland firefighters mostly facing different levels of exposure to mostly vegetative smoke versus non-vegetative smoke for city firefighters. Their PPE looks a little different. Wildland firefighters wear more lighter PPE with no standardized or mandatory respiratory protection, whereas city firefighters have a respirator and more heavy-duty PPE. Wildland firefighters tend to be more of a seasonal occupation versus city firefighters have longer-term contracts. And then now we also want to touch on wildland-urban interface wildland firefighting as well. As kind of climate change and fires are spreading into human settlements, there is kind of that exposure between non-vegetative and vegetative smoke, and also toxins being released into human settlements as well. So lastly, I'll go into a little bit about the health impacts that we've kind of uncovered through our research as well. So when we think about the occupation of wildland firefighting and how it becomes impacted in a changing environment, so more recently, as we're learning with climate change, wildfires have begun earlier and they're lasting longer. So meaning an increase in days of exposure to wildfire smoke. And this probes the question of how this exposure will impact wildland firefighter health and well-being. So much research is still needed and a lot of research is still emerging, but preliminary findings revealed that exposure to higher concentrations of smoke exposure over prolonged periods of time without proper protection increases the risk of harm to health. So what exactly happens physiologically when we inhale smoke? So researchers are still attempting to unravel this phenomenon and quantify the limits of exposure, which would have harmful impacts. But here's what the current evidence reveals. So firefighting was recently classified as a carcinogenic occupation in 2023 by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And there are two predominant routes of pollutant exposure, skin contact and inhalation. So if we take a look at the most researched pollutants, these are the toxins and gases in the smoke and air. So we have particulate matter, which is reported to be the largest threat to wildland firefighters, impacting their lung, heart, and vascular health. Carbon monoxide with effects like headaches and fatigue. And lastly, PAHs, which are known to be carcinogenic and increase the risk of lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. So when we think about all these invisible threats that can't be seen to the naked eye, wildland firefighters are constantly exposed to these toxins at high concentrations for prolonged periods of time with inadequate respiratory protective equipment. So that's all to say, once we got into this space, we realized within wildland firefighting, there's a lot more challenges than we expected. So I'll pass it down to Janna to take over for what's currently being done in this space.
Thank you, Arani. So as was mentioned, there are lots of challenges, and moving forward, what we found was important is to equip ourselves with the knowledge on what's happening in the field in terms of the developments, especially with respiratory protection for wildland firefighters. So one of the things that came up is current focus on half-face and full-face respirators, and a lot of other developments of protective equipment for wildland firefighters. However, there are some challenges with uptake of these protective equipments due to the context of fires, given the heat and the mixed terrain and the high physical demand on the wildland firefighters, the heavy equipment that they carry, and the remoteness of the occupation itself. Something else that we looked into was the literature in terms of what research has been done looking at the occupational health impacts. And there weren't many findings in terms of specific studies focused on wildland firefighters and smoke. However, a common name that came up multiple times is Dr. Nicola Cherry and her lab's work, especially with a study that was done post 2016 Fort McMurray fires that revealed that wildland firefighters are twice as likely to develop asthma than public post fires. And we also briefed ourselves on the other evidence that links wildfire smoke to changes in lung functionality, inflammation levels, increased risks of respiratory, cardiovascular diseases, and cancers. And so this was an important phase of our project to understand the health impact of smoke exposure moving forward for our project. And through our search, we also found some gaps in the evidence, one of them being a gap in research studies involving wildland firefighters through a co-design approach to see what smoke mitigation strategies could be tailored to their unique contexts and occupations given the multitude of challenges due to the unique context, as well as gaps in educational materials on smoke exposure and health impacts, and focused on knowledge translation. So really simplifying what the impacts of smoke exposure are, even just explaining what is in smoke. And this is likely due to the emergence of the field. There's still a lot of research being done. And so there might not be the same rate of effort or level of effort to simplify the educational or develop educational materials to increase awareness. And so these two gaps also we kept in mind moving forward for developing our project. And so what is our project? As mentioned by Arani in the previous slides with the Toronto Translational Framework, the first phases is really immersing ourselves in the context of the people that we are centering of our project, who are the wildland firefighters. And so the first step is to identify a problem, an unmet need, and framing the context, which will inform the building blocks of our research question for the study moving forward. And this brings us into the three main pillars of our study: the problem, need, and research question. The problem that we have chosen based off of the outreach that we've done with wildland firefighters is that wildland firefighters face significant exposure to smoke air pollutants without mitigation measures. And the need is for effective mitigation measures to reduce wildland firefighters' exposure to smoke air pollutants. And so the research question that we're using to guide our project is what strategies could optimize the mitigation of exposure to smoke air pollutants for wildland firefighters. And building off this pillar is our research design. We have two main methods adopted, the first being a survey to gauge an understanding of the wildland firefighting experience with smoke air pollution, current behaviors when it comes with uptake of personal protective equipment, and their levels of concern when it comes to the health impact of smoke exposure. And secondly, we had an ideation session, part of our approach as well, which brought together wildland firefighters who completed the survey, as well as multidisciplinary experts from engineering to occupational health and safety, and air quality expertise as well, to ideate strategies and see, given the constraints of the context of wildland firefighting and the lived experiences of wildland firefighters, what strategies could be created or developed moving forward. And the purpose was of these two methods actually points back to one of the gaps that was mentioned in terms of not really having studies or projects that involve the wildland firefighters in terms of what interventions could meet their lived experiences or could incorporate their lived experiences. And so we took a co-designed approach, and the goal was to have a co-designed intervention collaboratively with the experts, as well as the experts of their experiences, the wildland firefighters. And so this brings us to the roadmap of our study. So we started off by submitting the Research Ethics Board proposal for our study. And then afterwards, we secured our advisors for the study. So for our program, we need to have a program advisory committee to guide us throughout the process. And following that, we began our recruitment process to start recruiting the wildland firefighters. And some of you might be familiar with this, as we had disseminated the posters and flyers to join our study. And following that was our data collection phases, which included both the survey, and 2 weeks after the survey was the ideation session. And data analysis was actually sparse throughout the process, as some of our survey findings had informed the prompt used for the ideation session to guide the brainstorming and discussion process. And then the last two phases would be more on prototyping, designing the interventions, testing it in more of an iterative feedback loop cycle to figure out what the final intervention or interventions would look like. And you might be thinking, where are we now in this process? And I will not reveal this. We will have Sumegha reveal this towards the end of the presentation. So just to keep you on your toes a little bit, but there is some there's a fixed nature to this, as well as some flexibility. There's a lot of progression and changes that happen throughout our project that we are excited to share as well, and still opportunity for feedback, which we're excited to receive and hear from you today as well. So this brings us to the advisory team who has supported our process from the beginning and who were very important supports throughout this entire process since last year. So we have our two faculty supervisors from the Translational Research Program, Dr. Joseph Fehrenbach and Dr. Edith Markan. And we have our three handpicked experts who guided us through the process, Dr. Rakesh Sahu, biomedical engineer at McMaster, Lachlan Ari, who has had a lot of firefighting and wildland firefighting experiences of more than 13 years in Alberta, and Dr. Heather Simpson, an expert in fire management as well as project manager at SIPSI, and she's been absolutely incredible, supporting us and empowering us throughout the process, guiding us through every step. And yeah, this project would not have been as holistic and rooted in lived experiences and keeping us focused on the end goal without our advisory team. And so we are incredibly thankful. So this brings us to the results section. We'll begin with the survey findings. So we have collected 30 responses for our survey. 60% of participants had about 3+ years of season experience. The majority of the participants had experience in British Columbia, so 63.3% primarily worked in British Columbia. A limitation of our study is that we had no responses from those who have worked in Ontario or the Yukon territories. And the majority of our respondents were part of unit crews. So why we have the number 30, this is because we had a limitation in our budget to be able to provide tokens of appreciation for our participants. And this was something very important to us, is to make sure that it is it's not an extractive way of doing research, but that we appreciate all the participants in our study. And so with that, there's also some limitations of not having as large a sample size as possible. However, the responses from our participants were incredibly informative and very useful for our project progression moving forward. And moving on to the second kind of pillar of our survey findings is that we found, when asked about how often wildland firefighters of those who participated in the study wore respiratory protection, only 7% had mentioned that they wore it on a daily basis. However, 94% of participants expressed a level of concern for the health impacts of smoke exposure. And this was contextualized that the areas of concern for respiratory protective equipment was the PPE design. So that 77% said that it restricted breathing was a concern, that it would impair vision, 60% said that that was a concern, and lastly, 50% said comfort was also a concern for the protective equipment. And lastly, something that we included in the survey questions was whether there were any other opportunities for an intervention throughout the occupational tasks of wildland firefighting to reduce smoke exposure. So throughout our kind of initial outreach and primary research that we've done, we've learned that there's a lot of unique context to wildland firefighting, and that from their lived experiences of trying what's out on the market for respiratory protective equipment, there's a lot of challenges in the design. And so we asked if there were any other phases during wildland firefighting that could be more feasible to introduce an intervention into, and could contextualize the designs of any form of mitigation strategy for wildland firefighting. And throughout our study, we tried to keep as general as possible and not use respiratory protective equipment as a term, and keep it general to mitigation strategy in case there's an opportunity for an outside of the box idea that's not kind of boxed into what's already available in markets. And so from that, two main things came out. 43% mentioned direct attack, ignitions, and burnouts as potential intervention points, and 40% mentioned patrolling and mop-up as potential intervention points as well. And so these three survey findings really helped inform our ideation session prompts, which we will share as well. And so this brings us to the second phase of the Toronto Translational Framework, which has guided the process as well, which is more of the innovation phase. So after we've kind of collected data, how can we now use this research to create something new, given the lived experiences of the wildland firefighters? So this is where the conceptualization, the design phases come in, as well as the testing and the kind of iteration phases come in for the project. So for the second methodology, the method used for our study, we mentioned an ideation session. The prompt that was used was so we had prompts that were developed based off of the survey, and we broke down the ideation session into two separate phases. The first phase focused just on the offensive phases, given the survey results, so focused on direct attack, ignitions, and burnout. And then the second phase focused on post-offensive activities such as patrolling, mop-up, and we incorporated resting as well. Even though it wasn't in the, it did not emerge as a response in the question focused on feasible intervention points, we had other questions more open-ended and qualitative in nature, which revealed some thoughts about potentially incorporating an intervention during resting phases, as that's where wildland firefighters were also being exposed to smoke. And so we also incorporated within the post-offense phase. And after we had prepared our prompts, something that we found was really important was to develop pre-session packages, as we had experts coming in external to the context of wildland firefighting, similar to how we were also came in fresh. And so we kind of developed a very quick crash course on wildland firefighting, what type of equipment is worn, what are the different what forms of respiratory protection already exist in the market, and as well as the terminology for the different occupational tasks related to wildland firefighting. So what is burnout, what is direct attack, what is mop-up, what is cold trailing, what are the different modalities used for the resting phases. So we learned that some provinces still use the line spikes and tents, while others resort to more base camp approach for resting. And so we found it to be very important to make sure that the experts coming in who might not be familiar with wildland firefighting, but interested to use their expertise and knowledge to collaborate and see what solutions could come up, to brief them on what is the context of wildland firefighting. And so for the ideation session itself, we had lots of experts joining us. We had 3 from engineering, Dr. Rakesh Sahu, who's also part of our advisory committee, Dr. Kevin Golovin, a materials engineer at the University of Toronto, Dr. Darish Rosie, who is working in private sector focused on respiratory protective, 2 individuals from Occupational Health and Safety, Drew Lichty and Tanis Zadunayski, who we found were really important throughout this process to incorporate the health perspective. And we actually found this as a bit of a gap too. It was very difficult for us to find people with the perspective of occupational health and safety who focus on wildland firefighting context and wildfires. This was a challenge for us. And we're not sure if it's because of maybe not still being kind of fresh to the field, maybe not necessarily knowing all the individuals and experts working in the field, or whether there is a lack of workforce who focus on occupational health and wildland firefighting. But we were grateful to have at least 2 individuals with perspective to come in to share the health perspective throughout the process, and not just having the engineers kind of steer the discussion. And we also had some lived experience champions throughout the process. So here Larson, who's had wildland firefighting experience of over 20 years internationally in Canada, as well as USA and Australia. Lachlan, who is part of our advisory committee, and Eric Davidson, who has also had lots of experience in Ontario, which was very exciting for us, as that was a missing voice in our survey results. And so that was really important to incorporate as well throughout our process. And as you can see on the right, these are some ideas of that came out of the session. It was a 90-minute session, and it exploded with lots of different creative ideas. And afterwards, it was our responsibility to analyze all of these ideas and code them to see what are some patterns and what are some themes that we can take moving forward collaboratively with all of the stakeholders. And so this is summarized very briefly into this slide. As mentioned, we had 2 rounds for the ideation session. The first focused on the offensive duties, and the second round focused on the post-offensive duties. So as you can see in blue, these are the existing innovations in the market. So bandanas, some of you might argue this is not really an innovation, but it's we've heard that this is used by wildland firefighters, just a simple bandana to protect their or reduce their exposure to smoke, as well as cloth masks, N95 masks, and respirators. And there are emerging innovations actually that are coming up across in the news right now, which we haven't incorporated in the slide, but there's a lot more work being done in terms of what is existing in terms of research and development. And so this isn't comprehensive of all the different innovations. But in green are ideas that came out from the session, and you can see it's more compartmentalized and contextualized to the different duties. So we had some ideas come out for the offensive duties that focus more on clean air designs and new respirator designs. There were a lot of design considerations for respirators that were mentioned. And so that was something that was constantly flagged and emerged as a top code when we analyzed the sticky notes. For the post-offensive duties, there were also considerations for clean air shelters, as well as tools that monitor exposure to the different pollutants to help with identifying vulnerabilities and kind of who is being exposed more to the pollutants to support with more of the management of the personnel or even provision of health services to support with recuperation after. And mask designs were also brought up in the post-offensive duties. So there are many ideas and considerations as mentioned, and something that we very quickly discovered was we're getting ourselves to something way bigger than us, and that requires a lot more time than we have for our pilot study of a capstone project. And so this brings us to the sustainability of the project. We are grateful that the individuals, the experts who came into the ideation session discussion were interested to continue working in this space and bring together different stakeholders from their connections and from their networks and dedicate the time to have a larger project focused on this need and problem that guided the capstone project. And so we, in a very short time, actually submitted for the NRCan grant. And some of you might already be aware of this grant, but it came at a moment where we just finished the ideation session. So it was very much in alignment, and we thought it could be an opportunity to support the sustainability of the project, to see how the one-year effort could be continued and could scale into something much more of a larger project with different stakeholders and across multiple sites as well, with the incorporation of the wildland firefighters throughout the process too. So that model of co-creation, still keeping it really at the core of how the project is designed. And secondly, for our capstone project, which should be, in theory, finished by the end of this year, is the deliverable that we were leaning towards as a design guide for the wildland firefighting context, and to really synthesize all of the information that we've been collecting and learning about throughout this one-year process on the context of wildland firefighting, the different terrains, the different design considerations, and even just the perspectives from the wildland firefighters in terms of all the considerations that are important to them to be able to still do their occupation, but also opportunities to create safer working conditions as well. So yes, I will, that's all for me, and I will pass it on to Sumegha. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sumegha. So any ideas about what more we did? Let's dive into another angle we also wanted to tackle. So one of the critical aspects of our project has been awareness building. Through our conversations with the wildland firefighters, it became clear that there is a significant gap in resources and knowledge sharing around the health impacts of smoke exposure and evidence-based actions to mitigate these effects, as well as cultural barriers perceptions to adopt in respiratory protection. To address this need, we initiated a side project aimed at increasing knowledge and evidence-based research on smoke. Our goal was to create a resource that is simple, easy to understand and accessible while also being engaging for the wildland firefighter. This tool not only helps us bridge the gap in resources, but also enhances knowledge sharing around smoke pollution. To build this resource, we had a lot of word with wildland firefighters to understand what kind of material is interactive for them, what kind of materials is presented to webinars during their training processes, to be able to stimulate materials which increase the uptake of knowledge for them. So we developed an easy to read and visually engaging tool that communicates and the latest evidence-based actions for mitigation exposure. Mitigating smoke exposure. This resource is designed to be accessible to all the wildland firefighters, regardless of their background or level of expertise, ensuring that everyone has the information they need to protect their health. By using clear language, engaging visuals, and practical recommendations, we aim to make complex information more accessible. This initiative has helped bridge the gap in knowledge and resources, empowering firefighters with the information they need to stay safe and healthy in their challenging work environments. We believe that by building awareness and providing accessible resources, we can make a meaningful difference in the health and safety of wildland firefighters. So let's focus on the knowledge translation aspect of our project, which focuses on addressing smoke pollution through an innovative and engaging approach. So the goal is to create a cultural shift in the current barriers to adopt respiratory protection through increased understanding of evidence-based research on smoke so that once innovative protective strategies are created, wildland firefighters are likely to adopt them. And there's a cultural shift. We have been working on a storybook accompanied by a supplementary evidence-based report, aiming to convey evidence through storytelling while also ensuring accessibility and understanding of the material. The storybook serves as a captivating medium to share insights into smoke pollution, seamlessly weaving evidence into compelling narratives. Through relatable characters and engaging plots, readers can educate themselves on the effects of smoke pollution. Our storybook features two characters, Ash and Phoenix, whose experiences and adventures illustrate the real-world impacts of smoke exposure in an engaging and relatable way. In parallel, our supplementary evidence-based report complements the storybook by providing statistics in an easy-to-read format. We understand the importance of presenting complex information in simple language to enhance knowledge uptake, making sure that even technical details are accessible to all readers. While we were going through the literature review for understanding the space of wildland firefighting, we felt that the statistics provided were very difficult to understand, and we thought that in our storybook, that is something we want to tackle, to be able to present statistics which is easy to understand for anyone. In the center, you see the page of our storybook, which is the starting page. We'll be showing you more experts from that. So by combining storytelling with factual reporting, we aim to reach a wider audience and ensure that the important information about smoke pollution and its impact is both engaging and educational. If you have any feedback or suggestions on how we can further improve our knowledge translation efforts, please feel free to share them in the chat. Your input would be really valuable to us as we continue to refine this. So coming to the storybook, as I talked about, these are the few pages of the storybooks which we have shared on the screen. So let me walk you through our ongoing work on our storybook project. Initially, the story focused primarily on qualitative aspects, raising awareness about the health impacts of smoke exposure through engaging narratives. However, based on the feedbacks with wildland firefighters and stakeholders, we realized the importance of incorporating statistics and number to capture attention and reinforce our messages. So as you can see in the orange bubbles, which are currently empty right now, we will include these crucial statistics to enhance the story's impact. The storybook would also have a section about busting myths around smoke pollution. We have two key questions we need your support with for the storybook. First, where will the story live to reach as many wildland firefighters as possible? We want to ensure our storybook is easily accessible to wildland firefighters across Canada. We are considering various platforms such as online firefighter forums, departmental newsletters, social media groups, and dedicated websites for firefighter resources. We welcome any suggestions you have on effective distribution channels that can maximize the reach for our storybook. And secondly, which we want to discuss who else can we consult for the feedback on the content of the story to ensure it is as credible and trustworthy as possible. While we have already gathered valuable feedback from our initial consultations, we aim to further validate our content by consulting with additional experts. This could include healthcare professionals specializing in occupational health, experienced wildland firefighters, and researchers in environmental health. If you have any recommendation for specific individuals or group we should reach out to, please let us know in the chat. So coming to lessons learned, I would like to share some crucial lessons we have learned through our capstone journey and our project. These insights have been invaluable in shaping our approach and ensuring that our work is truly impactful. So first and the foremost point has been embracing flexibility. Throughout our project, we have learned the importance of staying flexible. Situations and needs can change rapidly, especially in a dynamic environment like wildland firefighting. Being adaptable allows us to respond to new information and adjust our approach as needed, ensuring that our interventions remain relevant and effective. We had multiple iterations of our research question, research design, just to be able to understand the lived experiences and make that a part of our study. Second would be no assumptions. We learn that it's essential to put aside our individual biases or assumptions. Instead of pre-assuming what wildland firefighters might need based on scientific literature review or personal biases, we need to listen to them. They are the experts of their experiences. In fact, we are all experts of our experiences. Therefore, wildland firefighter can best articulate their challenges and desired outcomes. By being receptive to their input, we gained a more accurate understanding of their needs, which we have incorporated in our project. The third point would be the value of continuous feedback. Continuous feedback is crucial for success. We regularly engage with wildland firefighters and other stakeholders to help us refine our approach and address any emerging issues promptly. This iterative process ensured that our interventions are continually improved and remain aligned with the real-world needs of those we aim to serve, and keep us grounded in the essence of lived experience and co-designing aspect of our project. So coming to the fourth point, it would be avoid solution jumping, which our program is very, very serious about, and they do not let us do that at any cost. So it's instinctive to want to jump to solutions once a problem is identified. And we did that multiple times within our group during the initial phases of our capstone. However, this can lead to solving issues that don't actually exist and getting a lot of proposals rejected by your supervisors. So to ensure our final intervention is useful, impactful, and meets the need of the wildland firefighter, we are committed to co-designing with them and other stakeholders. This collaborative process ensures that our intervention reflects their input and they're involved at every stage. Some months back, we didn't know what a final intervention would look like because it was supposed to be built and informed through this ongoing collaboration. Now we have a much clearer idea, which I'll be sharing in the subsequent slides. Finally, the importance of building trust, which has been the most important part of our project. Building trust with the wildland firefighters and other stakeholders is essential. Trust fosters open communication and collaboration, which are key to successful co-design. By demonstrating our commitment to understanding and addressing their needs, we establish a strong foundation for effective partnerships. So as we conclude, we want to leave you with a call to action, sharing some main takeaways from our journey as fellow and proactive learners in this space. So first would be translating evidence into impact. A lot of knowledge and research can get stuck in a continuous cycle without ever making a real world impact. In our capstone project, we embrace innovative approaches to translating existing evidence into meaningful actions. By applying research in practical way, we aim to improve health outcomes. We are excited to share these methods and experiences, hoping they inspire similar positive impacts in other contexts as well. Secondly, yes, there are lots of problems, and we also have the ability to create a change. During our journey, we often felt overwhelmed by the problems we encountered. However, we learned that alongside these challenges, there are immense opportunities to create change. Instead of being discouraged, we sought out the right tools, connected with the knowledgeable people in the field, and utilized available resources to explore gaps, identify needs, and collaborate on creating effective intervention. We hope that by sharing our experiences, others will be inspired to do the same. Lived experiences move people. Through our work, we discovered the profound power of stories and lived experiences, being the central part of our capstone. These narratives carry significant weight in truly understanding an issue. By centering our research and efforts around those directly affected, we were able to foster meaningful change. Stories brought our data to life, helping others connect on a deeper level with the issues at hand. We hope that sharing our learning experience will inspire others to leverage the power of lived experiences in their own work. We hope these insights are helpful to you as they helped us in our capstone journey. So coming to the next steps. So let's talk about some of our immediate next steps that we would be catering to in the near future. First, our design guide will provide crucial consideration for planning smoke exposure interventions tailored to specific provinces. One of the initial deliverables for the grant and a key deliverable for our capstone is the development of a comprehensive user and context design guide. We will focus on creating a detailed guide for 2 to 3 provinces by matching data from our survey. For example, Ontario is the only province where wildland firefighters use line cam tents, necessitating a user context design guide specific to Ontario in that context for engineers to build tailored intervention. This guide will also reflect the lived experiences of wildland firefighters across different agencies in Canada, highlighting commonalities and unique provincial characteristics. We have begun gathering this information through interviews and surveys with wildland firefighters from the data we already have. Additionally, we plan to consult with engineers to determine their specific needs for developing technologies and innovation, such as power sourcing, camp locations, and gear textile materials. This design guide will serve as a valuable knowledge product, fostering collaboration and cooperation in mitigation strategies among multidisciplinary teams and the wider public. Second, we will be disseminating our knowledge translation storybook. This storybook is designed to communicate our findings and recommendations to a broader audience. By using engaging visuals and narratives, we aim to make complex information accessible. We will be distributing the storybook through webinars, social media, and collaborations with relevant organizations to maximize its reach and impact. Another task on our list is writing a research report on our capstone project for publication purposes. To avoid siloed efforts to tackle a shared problem, we want to share the progress we have made so far with the community for the research to be ongoing and evolving in wildland firefighting space. So that brings us to the end of our presentation, and thank you for being such a wonderful audience and engaging with us. We welcome any questions or feedback. Feel free to reach out to us over our team email, which is mentioned, and I'll also send that in the chat. I'll be putting that in the chat soon. And we now open the floor to any discussions, questions, feedback for our project.
Well, thank you very much, Arani, Sumegha, and Janna. That's really interesting, and it's such a timely project too. It's almost serendipitous that you're working on this capstone when the Wildfire Resilient Futures Initiative came out and potential funding opportunities. I am going to take this opportunity to stop the recording before we begin our interactive session.